I'm Eleanor Thompson, 67 years old, and last Tuesday I watched 40 years of memories turn to ash as my house burned to the ground. With nowhere else to go, I called my son Mitchell, expecting the comfort of family. Instead, I got 6 cruel words that shattered my heart. "We don't have space for you." Desperate and alone, I made one last call to someone I hadn't spoken to in decades. Little did I know that single call would completely transform my life forever. Before I continue my story, let me know where you're watching from and hit subscribe if you haven't already. The morning before the fire was like any other Tuesday in my quiet life. I woke up at 6:30, made myself a cup of Earl Grey tea, and sat on my porch swing watching the neighborhood come to life. My home wasn't fancy, just a modest 2-bedroom rental in Oakwood Gardens that I'd lived in for almost 20 years. But it was mine in all the ways that mattered. The floral wallpaper in the kitchen was faded. The hardwood floors creaked in exactly the same spots they always had, and the whole place smelled like cinnamon and old books. It was perfect. After Harold passed away 5 years ago, the house became more than just a place to live. It became my sanctuary, filled with 40 years of memories and treasures that money couldn't replace. On the mantel above the fireplace sat our wedding photo, Harold looking so handsome in his navy uniform. Beside it was the antique clock his parents had given us as a wedding present. The china cabinet in the dining room held my mother's hand-painted tea set that had somehow survived the journey from England when she was just a girl. And in my bedroom, carefully folded in the cedar chest at the foot of my bed, was the quilt my mother had made for me when I left home, each square representing a special moment in my life. The most precious items were the photo albums, 12 leather-bound books chronicling our life together. Harold and me on our honeymoon at Niagara Falls. Mitchell taking his first steps. Robert's high school graduation. Family Christmases, birthday parties, and lazy summer barbecues. Those albums were my time machines, taking me back to happier days when my family was whole. My sons had taken such different paths in life. Mitchell, my oldest at 43, had always been the ambitious one. He'd gotten his MBA, married Tiffany from a well-connected family, and moved to Lakeside Estates, the kind of neighborhood with a guardhouse at the entrance. He had the perfect house, the perfect wife, and 2 perfect children, Mason and Sophia. At least that's how it looked from the outside. But over the years, the visits became less frequent, the phone calls shorter. Always busy with work, soccer practice, or some charity event. I tried not to take it personally, but mothers know when they're being pushed to the periphery of their children's lives. Robert was different. My youngest had always marched to his own drummer. After college, he'd moved to Portland to pursue his music, working at a record store and playing gigs on weekends. He wasn't financially successful like his brother, but he called me every Sunday without fail. We'd talk for hours about everything and nothing. He was planning to visit for Christmas, saving up for the plane ticket. It would have been the first time in 3 years I'd seen him in person. After Harold died, money got tight. The life insurance barely covered the funeral expenses, and Social Security doesn't stretch very far these days. I started working part-time at the Oakwood Public Library 3 days a week, shelving books and helping with the children's reading hour. Miss Eleanor, the kids called me. The job didn't pay much, but it gave me purpose, community, and just enough extra to keep the lights on. My neighbor Patricia Allen had been a godsend during these years. A retired nurse in her 70s, she lived in the blue house next door and checked on me almost daily. We'd share coffee on my porch or her patio depending on the weather, and keep an eye out for each other. "That's what neighbors do," she always said. When I had the flu last winter, she brought homemade chicken soup and picked up my prescriptions. The house had been showing its age lately. The electrical system was as old as the building itself, with frequent power surges that made the lights flicker. I'd reported it to my landlord, Mr. Jenkins, at least 4 times over the past year. Each time, he'd send his nephew Brian to fix it, which usually meant replacing a fuse and promising to come back with proper parts. He never did. The last time, 3 weeks before the fire, I'd been more insistent. "This could be dangerous," I told Mr. Jenkins over the phone. "Just some old house quirks," he'd replied dismissively. "Nothing to worry about." That final Tuesday, I'd spent the morning cleaning the house and the afternoon preparing Harold's special lasagna recipe for the weekly family dinner I still hosted, even though Mitchell and his family rarely showed up anymore. The last 3 times, Tiffany had called an hour before with some excuse. Soccer practice, work emergency, the children weren't feeling well. But I kept cooking, kept hoping. That's what mothers do. As I layered the pasta, ricotta, and sauce, I hummed along to Sinatra on my old record player. The setting sun streamed through the kitchen window, casting everything in a golden glow. I remember thinking how peaceful it was, how content I felt in that moment. If I'd known it was the last time I'd stand in that kitchen, would I have done anything differently? Would I have grabbed the photo albums first? Taken one last look at each room? I'll never know. Some endings don't announce themselves. They just arrive, unannounced and unmerciful. The smoke alarm never sounded. That's what haunts me most about that night. I woke not to a blaring alarm but to the acrid smell of smoke filling my bedroom. It was 3:27 in the morning according to the glowing numbers on my bedside clock. At first, in that fuzzy space between sleep and wakefulness, I thought I'd left something on the stove. It took several seconds for my brain to process that something was terribly wrong. When I opened my bedroom door, I was hit by a wall of thick black smoke. The hallway was already engulfed, orange flames licking up the wallpaper and across the ceiling. The heat was intense, stealing the breath from my lungs. In that moment, all rational thought disappeared. Pure instinct took over. I grabbed my robe from the foot of the bed and pressed it against my face. Through the window, I could see the flames had already reached the front of the house. The back door through the kitchen was my only option. Staying low, I crawled across the bedroom floor, past the cedar chest that held my mother's quilt, past the nightstand with Harold's watch and our wedding photo. There wasn't time to save anything. The kitchen was filling with smoke, but the flames hadn't reached it yet. I made it to the back door, my fingers fumbling with the lock as panic threatened to overwhelm me. Finally, the door swung open, and I stumbled out into the cool night air, coughing and gasping. From the safety of my backyard, I watched in horror as my home was devoured by flames. The fire moved with terrifying speed, windows shattering from the heat, the roof beginning to cave in. I must have been screaming because suddenly Patricia was beside me in her nightgown and slippers, putting a blanket around my shoulders and guiding me across the lawn to the street where other neighbors had gathered. Someone had called 911. I could hear sirens in the distance growing louder. Time seemed to both stand still and rush forward. I remember disconnected moments. The first fire truck arriving, firefighters unraveling hoses, the powerful jets of water that seemed so ineffectual against the raging inferno. A young paramedic named Olivia checking my vitals, placing an oxygen mask over my face when she realized I was having trouble breathing. By the time 3 fire trucks were on the scene, it was clear they were fighting a losing battle. They focused on containing the blaze, preventing it from spreading to neighboring homes. I sat on the curb across the street, Patricia's arm around my shoulders, watching 40 years of my life disappear. "I'm so sorry, Eleanor," Patricia kept saying, as if the fire were somehow her fault. I couldn't speak, couldn't process what was happening. Shock, the paramedic called it. She wanted to take me to the hospital, but I refused to leave. I needed to see it through to the end. As dawn broke, casting a pale pink glow over the neighborhood, the fire was finally under control. What remained of my house was a smoldering shell, blackened timbers reaching toward the sky like skeletal fingers. The firefighters were rolling up their hoses, their faces streaked with soot and exhaustion. The fire chief, a tall man named Gregory Peterson, approached me with grave eyes. "The fire appears to have started in the walls," he explained gently. "Electrical fire, most likely. These old houses, the wiring deteriorates over time." I thought about all those times I'd called Mr. Jenkins about the flickering lights. All those times his nephew had done the bare minimum. Patricia insisted I come stay with her. "For as long as you need," she said firmly, brooking no argument. In a daze, I followed her to her house, wearing her clothes since I had nothing but the nightgown on my back. Everything else was gone. My mother's quilt, Harold's watch, the photo albums, all turned to ash. Later that morning, a man in a crisp suit arrived at Patricia's house. Raymond Wilson from Jenkins Property Insurance. His expression was professionally sympathetic as he explained that while the structure was covered by the landlord's policy, my personal belongings were not. "Did you have renter's insurance, Mrs. Thompson?" he asked, knowing the answer before I spoke. "No," Iwisparat. Harold had always handled our insurance. After he died, so many things had fallen through the cracks. I'd meant to look into it, but there were always more immediate concerns. Bills to pay. Groceries to buy. The luxury of planning for disasters had seemed beyond my means. I'm very sorry, Raymond said, closing his leather portfolio. Unfortunately, without personal property coverage, there's no compensation for your belongings. It was only then, sitting at Patricia's kitchen table in borrowed clothes, that the full magnitude of my loss hit me. I wasn't just homeless. I was possessionless. Every memento, every treasure, every physical connection to my past was gone, and I had nowhere to go. Patricia let me use her phone to call Mitchell. My cell phone had been charging on my nightstand, and was now just another casualty of the fire. As the phone rang, I rehearsed what to say, trying to find the right words to explain the catastrophe without sounding like I was asking for help. Even in crisis, a mother's instinct is to protect her children from worry. Mom. Mitchell answered on the fourth ring, his voice groggy with sleep. It was barely 7 in the morning. Is everything okay? The question broke something loose inside me, and suddenly I was sobbing into the phone, the words tumbling out between gasps. The house, there was a fire. Everything's gone, Mitchell. Everything. His voice immediately shifted from sleepy to alert. Are you hurt? Where are you now? I'm fine. I'm at Patricia's next door. But I don't know what to do. The insurance won't cover anything, and I have nowhere to go. There was a pause, a muffled conversation on his end. I could hear Tiffany's voice in the background, though not her words. Then Mitchell was back. Of course you'll come stay with us, Mom. Just until you get back on your feet. I'll come pick you up in a couple of hours, okay? Relief washed over me. Of course Mitchell would help. He was my son, my firstborn. Despite the distance that had grown between us over the years, family was family. Thank you, I whispered. I don't know what I would have done. Patricia helped me gather the few items I had. A borrowed set of clothes, a toothbrush she'd given me, and my purse, which had thankfully been near the back door when I escaped. The fire had singed the leather, but the contents were intact. My wallet. Some lipstick. An old address book I'd carried for years out of habit rather than necessity. Not much to show for 67 years of life. Mitchell arrived just after 9, pulling his gleaming black SUV to the curb. He looked every inch the successful businessman in his casual but expensive weekend clothes. When he hugged me, I could smell his cologne, something woodsy and sophisticated. It's going to be okay, Mom, he said, helping me into the passenger seat. I believed him. The drive to Lakeside Estates took almost 40 minutes. Mitchell filled the silence with practical questions. Had I called the insurance company? Did I have my important documents? Social security card? Birth certificate? Each question was another reminder of all I had lost. We passed through the security gate, the guard nodding respectfully to Mitchell. Lakeside Estates was as unlike my modest neighborhood as possible. Perfect lawns stretched before massive houses. Luxury cars sat in circular driveways. Even the air seemed cleaner, as if poverty and misfortune were kept out along with unauthorized vehicles. Mitchell and Tiffany's house was a sprawling 2-story colonial with white columns and black shutters. As we pulled into the driveway, I saw the front door open. Tiffany stood there, her blonde hair pulled back in a ponytail, wearing yoga pants and a fitted top that probably cost more than my monthly Social Security check. Her smile didn't reach her eyes. Eleanor, she said, giving me a brief hug that felt more like a formality than comfort. What a terrible thing to happen.
Come in.
The inside of their house was like something from a magazine. White carpet, glass tables, abstract art on the walls. Not a single thing out of place. I suddenly felt very aware of my borrowed clothes and the lingering smell of smoke in my hair. The guest room isn't really set up, Tiffany explained, leading me through the immaculate living room. But we can make do with the den for now. There's a sofa bed. The den was clearly Mitchell's space. Dark leather furniture. Bookshelves filled with business books and sports memorabilia. A large television mounted on the wall. It felt strange to think of sleeping in here, but I was grateful for any roof over my head. Grandma! 2 voices called out in unison as Mason and Sophia burst into the room. At 10 and 8, They were at that perfect age where grandmothers were still wonderful magical beings who baked cookies and told stories. They threw their arms around me, and for the first time since the fire, I felt a spark of joy. "We heard about your house," Sophia said, her blue eyes wide. "Did you lose all your stuff?" "Sophia," Tiffany said sharply. "That's not appropriate. Grandma doesn't want to talk about that right now." But I didn't mind. Their innocent concern was healing in a way that adult sympathy wasn't. "Yes, sweetheart, I did lose my things. But the important thing is that I'm okay." "Can Grandma stay in my room?" Sophia asked, looking up at her mother. "I could sleep on the trundle bed." Tiffany's smile tightened. "That's very sweet, honey, but Grandma will be more comfortable in the den. Now why don't you two go finish your homework, so we can have lunch soon?" The children left reluctantly, and an awkward silence filled the room. Mitchell checked his watch. "I should make some calls, see if I can find out about emergency assistance programs." He disappeared into his home office, leaving me alone with Tiffany. "Can I get you anything?" she asked, her tone suggesting she hoped the answer was no. "I'm fine, thank you. I appreciate you opening your home to me. It won't be for long, I promise." Tiffany nodded, relief evident on her face. "Of course. Family helps family." The words sounded rehearsed, empty. Lunch was a strained affair. Tiffany served some kind of quinoa salad that tasted like flavored cardboard. The children peppered me with questions about the fire until Tiffany shushed them. Mitchell kept checking his phone. I felt like an intruder, disrupting their perfect weekend routine. That evening, after a dinner where I offered to help and was politely refused, I overheard Tiffany and Mitchell talking in the kitchen, while I sat with the children in the living room, helping them with a puzzle. "How long is she planning to stay?" Tiffany's voice, trying to be quiet but carrying in the open floor plan house. "I don't know. Where else can she go?" Mitchell sounded defensive. "What about Robert? Why is it always us who have to step up? You know Robert can barely support himself. Besides, he lives in a studio apartment across the country." "Well, we can't have her here indefinitely. The charity gala is next weekend, and we have the Wilsons coming to stay. What am I supposed to tell them? Sorry, you'll have to sleep on the couch because my mother-in-law burned her house down." I felt my face flush with shame. I hadn't realized they had plans that I was imposing. I looked at the children, hoping they hadn't heard, but Sophia was watching me with sad eyes. She'd heard. She understood more than her parents gave her credit for. The next morning, tension hung in the air like a storm cloud. Mitchell left early for a work emergency. Tiffany bustled around the house, cleaning things that were already spotless, pointedly sighing whenever she passed the den where my few belongings were neatly stacked. By late afternoon, I'd made a decision. I would call some extended stay motels, see what I could afford with the little money I had saved. I couldn't stay where I wasn't wanted. I was looking up numbers in the phone book when Mitchell returned home. He and Tiffany immediately went into their bedroom, voices raised just enough that I could tell they were arguing, but not enough to make out the words. When they emerged, Mitchell's face was set in grim lines. "Mom, can we talk?" he asked, gesturing to the dining room table. I nodded, my stomach knotting with dread. I knew what was coming. We sat across from each other at the gleaming table. Tiffany stood behind Mitchell, arms crossed. "Mom, we've been thinking," Mitchell began, not quite meeting my eyes. "This isn't really the best time for an extended visit. We've got the charity gala next weekend, and we're having guests. What your son is trying to say," Tiffany cut in, "is that we don't have space for you right now." The words hit me like a physical blow. "I see," I said quietly. "It's not that we don't want to help," Mitchell continued quickly. "It's just with our schedules and the kids' activities and the house arrangement. The guest room is being renovated," Tiffany added, though I'd seen no evidence of any construction. "And the den really isn't suitable for long term." "I understand," I said, though I didn't. I didn't understand how my son, the baby I'd nursed through colic and chickenpox, the boy I'd stayed up with all night working on science projects, the young man whose college tuition I'd worked 2 jobs to help pay, could look me in the eye and tell me he had no room for me in my darkest hour. "We want to help though," Mitchell said, pulling out his wallet. He extracted 3 $100 bills and placed them on the table between us. This should cover a motel for a few days until you can get some assistance from social services or something. $300. That's what my son thought my life was worth. That's what 40 years of motherhood had earned me. I looked at the money, then at my son, searching for the little boy I'd raised. He wasn't there. In his place was a stranger who looked at me and saw an inconvenience, a problem to be solved with the least possible disruption to his comfortable life. When do you need me to leave? I asked, my voice steadier than I felt. Well, if you could pack up tonight. Tiffany began. We can drive you to a motel in the morning, Mitchell finished. I nodded, rising from the table without touching the money. I'll be ready. That night, lying on the sofa bed in the den, I allowed myself to cry silently into the pillow. Not just for the house and possessions I'd lost, but for the son I no longer recognized. For the family I thought I had. The pain of Mitchell's rejection cut deeper than the loss of any material thing. Houses can be rebuilt. Objects can be replaced. But how do you rebuild a broken heart? The Pinewood Motel had seen better days. Decades better. The carpet was stained, the wallpaper peeling, and the entire place smelled of stale cigarettes despite the no-smoking signs. But at $69 a night, it was what I could afford. Mitchell had driven me there the next morning, helped carry my small bag to the room, and then stood awkwardly by the door. Call if you need anything, he said, not quite meeting my eyes. I nodded, not trusting myself to speak. What would I say? That I was heartbroken? That I couldn't believe my own son would abandon me? That I was terrified of what would happen when the $300 ran out? After he left, I sat on the edge of the bed and surveyed my new temporary home. A double bed with a sagging mattress. A dresser with 3 drawers, one missing its handle. A small table with a coffee maker but no coffee. A television that probably got 4 channels if I was lucky. The reality of my situation crashed over me like a wave. I was 67 years old, homeless, with no possessions and limited funds. My son had turned his back on me. My other son was across the country, loving but unable to help financially. I had no family to turn to, no safety net to catch me. For the first time in my life, I understood what it meant to have nothing. When Harold died, I still had my home, my memories, my sense of security. Now even that was gone. I curled up on the bed and let the tears come. Great racking sobs that seemed to start in the very center of my being. I cried until my throat was raw and my eyes were swollen. Until I had no tears left, only a hollow emptiness. Night fell, and I didn't bother turning on the lights. What was the point? I lay in the darkness, memories washing over me like gentle waves. Harold and I dancing in our tiny first apartment. Mitchell taking his first steps, arms outstretched toward me, his face alight with triumph. Robert playing Twinkle Twinkle Little Star at his first piano recital, so nervous his little hands trembled on the keys. Harold had always been the practical one, the planner. I'll make sure you're taken care of, Ellie, he'd promised in those final weeks, his voice weak but his eyes still full of love. You'll never have to worry. But cancer doesn't care about promises, and the medical bills had drained our savings. The life insurance had barely covered the funeral costs. And now, 5 years later, I was alone in a rundown motel with nowhere to go. Morning brought no relief, only a grim determination to survive. I showered in the tiny bathroom, the water alternating between scalding and freezing with no warning. I put on Patricia's borrowed clothes, now rumpled from being slept in. I needed a plan. The motel had a payphone in the lobby. I spent the morning making calls, my quarters disappearing one by one. The Red Cross could provide emergency assistance but had a 2-week waiting list. The Senior Housing Authority had a 6-month waiting list. The women's shelter was full. Each call ended the same way. We're sorry, but there's nothing immediate we can do. By noon, I was down to my last quarter and no closer to a solution. I called Robert, needing to hear a friendly voice. Mom, I've been trying to reach you. His voice was thick with worry. Mitchell called and told me about the fire. Are you okay? Where are you staying? I couldn't tell him the truth. Couldn't bear to admit that his brother had turned me away, that I was in a seedy motel with dwindling funds. I'm fine. Oni. Staying with a friend for now. Which friend? I didn't know you had friends with spare rooms. Robert always could see through my little white lies. It's temporary, I said, avoiding the question. Just until I figure things out. Mom, I wish I could help more. I can send you what I have in savings, but it's not much. Maybe $300. My sweet, generous boy, offering me everything he had when his brother, who had so much more, had shown me the door. No, sweetheart. You keep your money. I'll be fine, really. Are you sure? Because I could try to get a loan, or maybe sell some equipment. Absolutely not. I forbid it. I soften my tone. I appreciate the offer more than you know, but I'll figure this out. I always do, don't I? After promising to call him in a few days, I hung up and returned to my room. I emptied my purse onto the bed, taking inventory of what I had left. Wallet with ID and $67 in cash. The $300 from Mitchell. A tube of lipstick. A packet of tissues. A small bottle of hand lotion. A comb. And my old address book, the leather cover cracked with age. I flipped through the address book idly, a roll call of the dead and the lost. So many names crossed out. Friends who had passed away. Acquaintances who had moved with no forwarding address. Family members long gone. It was like holding a physical manifestation of my shrinking world. And then there it was. A name not crossed out, though I hadn't contacted him in over 30 years. Walter Hammond. Walter, Harold, and I had been inseparable in college. The Three Musketeers, people called us. Walter had been the brilliant one, always tinkering with computers even back in the 70s when most people didn't know what they were. He'd been painfully shy, awkward around anyone except Harold and me. We'd been his social buffer, his connection to the world outside his brilliant mind. After graduation, we'd stayed close. Walter was the best man at our wedding. He'd been there when Mitchell was born, bringing a teddy bear bigger than the baby. When his first business venture failed spectacularly, leaving him broke and despondent, Harold and I had taken him in. He lived in our spare bedroom for 8 months, slowly rebuilding his confidence and his dreams. Then came his big break. A computer program he'd developed caught the attention of a major corporation. Suddenly, Walter was on his way. He moved to California, started his own company. We saw less and less of him as his success grew. Christmas cards became phone calls, became occasional emails. And then silence. His company, Hammond Tech, became a household name. We watched from afar as our old friend became one of the wealthiest men in America. I ran my finger over his name and the phone number beneath it, probably decades out of date. What would be the harm in trying? The worst that could happen would be reaching a disconnected number, or a stranger who had no idea who Walter Hammond was. With my last quarter, I returned to the lobby phone and dialed the number, expecting nothing. 1 ring. 2 rings. 3. Hammond residence. The voice was male, formal. Not Walter. A butler? Did people still have butlers? I'm sorry to bother you, I said, suddenly feeling foolish. I'm trying to reach Walter Hammond. I'm an old friend from college. May I ask who's calling, please? Eleanor Thompson. Eleanor Williams back then. I added my maiden name as an afterthought, doubting it would make any difference. 1 moment, please. I waited, listening to the silence on the line, already rehearsing what I would say when the butler came back to politely dismiss me. I shouldn't have called. What was I thinking? That a billionaire would drop everything because an old college friend was in trouble? Ellie? Is that really you? The voice sent me back 40 years in an instant. Older, yes, but unmistakably Walter. No one else had ever called me Ellie except him and Harold. Walter. I breathed, tears springing to my eyes. Yes, it's me. My God, it's been years. How are you? How's Harold? And just like that, I was crying again, the words tumbling out between sobs. Harold's death. The fire. Mitchell's rejection. The motel. All of it. Walter listened without interrupting. When I finally ran out of words, there was a brief silence. Where are you right now exactly? He asked, his voice gentle but urgent. The Pinewood Motel on Riverside Drive. Room 12. Stay there. Don't move. I'm sending someone for you. Walter, no, I didn't call for that. I didn't know who else to call. Ellie, he said, and I could hear the smile in his voice. Do you remember what you said to me when I lost everything and showed up at your door with a suitcase and $20 to my name? I remembered. I said that's what friends are for. Exactly. Now it's my turn. My assistant Vincent will be there within the hour. Go with him. Please. After we hung up, I sat on the edge of the bed dazed. Had that really happened? Would someone actually show up? Or was this some elaborate hallucination born of desperation and exhaustion? Exactly 52 minutes later, a knock came at my door. I opened it to find a tall, distinguished man in a dark suit. Mrs. Thompson? I'm Vincent Adams, Mr. Hammond's personal assistant. I'm here to take you to him. Outside waited a sleek black limousine, so out of place in the Pinewood Motel parking lot that several other guests had come out to stare. The limousine glided through the city streets, taking me from the rundown neighborhood of the Pinewood Motel to areas I barely recognized. Vincent sat across from me, occasionally speaking into his phone in quiet, efficient tones. I gazed out the window, watching the scenery change from discount stores and fast food restaurants to boutiques and upscale cafes. Where are we going? I finally asked, breaking the silence. The Westbrook Hotel, Vincent replied. Mr. Hammond has arranged a suite for you. The Westbrook was the most exclusive hotel in the city, a gleaming tower of glass and steel where celebrities stayed when they came to town. I'd never set foot inside it before. That's not necessary, I protested. Just a simple room somewhere would be fine. Vincent smiled politely. Mr. Hammond was very specific about the arrangements, Mrs. Thompson. He wanted you to be comfortable. Comfortable seemed an understatement when we arrived at the Westbrook. The lobby was a marble palace, with crystal chandeliers and fresh flower arrangements taller than I was. The staff greeted Vincent by name, and I was whisked up to the 20th floor without even stopping at the reception desk. The suite was larger than my entire house had been. A spacious living room with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city. A dining area with a table that could seat 8. A bedroom with the largest bed I'd ever seen. And a bathroom with a tub deep enough to swim in. Mr. Hammond will join you for dinner at 7, Vincent informed me. In the meantime, he thought you might need a few things. He gestured to the closet, which I now saw was filled with clothing. Dresses, pants, blouses, shoes. All in my size. How did he know my size? I asked, fingering the soft fabric of a blue sweater. Mr. Hammond has resources, Vincent said enigmatically. Is there anything else you need before I go? I shook my head, still trying to process the surreal turn my life had taken in the span of a few hours. From a dingy motel room to a luxury suite. From abandoned to cared for. It was overwhelming. After Vincent left, I explored the suite in a daze. The refrigerator was stocked with food and drinks. The bathroom had every toiletry I could possibly need, from shampoo to face cream. On the desk in the living room sat a brand new cell phone with a note. Thought you might need this. My number is programmed in. Call if you need anything at all. Walter. I took the longest, hottest shower of my life, washing away the smell of smoke that seemed to have seeped into my skin. I dressed in new clothes that fit perfectly, applied a little of the makeup that had been provided, and brushed my hair with an actual brush instead of the comb from my purse. The woman in the mirror looked more like me than I'd seen in days, though the sadness in her eyes remained. At precisely 7 there was a knock at the door. I opened it, and there stood Walter Hammond. Time had changed him, of course. The lanky, awkward boy with perpetually disheveled hair and ink-stained fingers had become a distinguished man with silver at his temples and laugh lines around his eyes. But the warm smile, the slightly crooked front tooth, the kind eyes behind stylish glasses, those were all the same. Ellie, he said softly, opening his arms. I stepped into his embrace without hesitation, and for the first time since the fire I felt safe. We held each other for a long moment, 40 years melting away. Let me look at you, Walter said, stepping back but keeping his hands on my shoulders. Still beautiful. I laughed, brushing away a tear. Still a terrible liar. Walter grinned, that familiar lopsided smile that had always made him look boyish despite his serious nature. Hungry? I've arranged for dinner. Dinner was a feast served in the suite's dining room by the hotel's staff. Lobster bisque, filet mignon, roasted vegetables, fresh bread. Walter insisted I eat, watching with satisfaction as I cleaned my plate for the first time in days. Over dessert, a decadent chocolate souffle, we caught up on decades of life. Walter told me about the rise of Hammond Tech, his brief marriage and amicable divorce, his philanthropic foundation. I shared stories of the library, of Mitchell's career and Robert's music, carefully avoiding any mention of Mitchell's recent betrayal. And Harold, Walter said, his voice softening. I was so sorry to hear about his passing. I should have been there. You sent flowers, I reminded him. And that beautiful letter. Not enough. Not for what you two meant to me. Walter set down his coffee cup. Ellie, do you remember that year after college when my first company went under? When I lost everything? I nodded. You stayed with us until you got back on your feet. I was suicidal, Walter said bluntly. Did you know that? When I showed up at your door that night, I'd already decided that if you turned me away, I was going to end it all. Walter. I gasped. We had no idea. Of course not. I hid it well. But you and Harold, you saved my life. Not just by giving me a place to stay, but by believing in me when I'd stopped believing in myself. He reached across the table and took my hand. I've never forgotten that. And I've always wanted a chance to repay that kindness. You don't owe me anything, I protested. I owe you everything, Walter countered. Let me help you, Ellie. Not just with a hotel room and some clothes. Let me really help you. The next morning, Walter sent Vincent to pick me up. We drove to a sleek office building downtown, where I was introduced to Diane Prentice, a sharply dressed woman who was apparently one of the city's top attorneys. Mrs. Thompson, she greeted me, shaking my hand firmly. Mr. Hammond has briefed me on your situation. I believe we have several avenues to pursue regarding your landlord's negligence. For the next hour, Diane asked detailed questions about the electrical issues I'd reported, the inadequate repairs, the fire chief's assessment. She took copious notes, occasionally nodding with a predatory gleam in her eye that suggested Mr. Jenkins would soon regret his corner-cutting ways. Based on what you've told me, we have a strong case for negligence, Diane concluded. I'll file the paperwork today and begin discovery immediately. In the meantime, Mr. Hammond has asked me to assist with your insurance claim and to look into emergency housing assistance. I left the law office feeling something I hadn't felt since the fire. Hope? It wasn't just the prospect of financial compensation, though that would certainly help. It was the knowledge that someone was fighting for me, that I wasn't alone in this battle. Vincent was waiting outside in the limousine. Mr. Hammond thought you might want to replace some essentials, he said as we pulled away from the curb. He's arranged an account at several stores. What followed was a surreal shopping spree. Clothing stores where attendants brought items in my size without my having to ask. A department store where I selected new toiletries, a suitcase, a purse. An electronics store where I was presented with a laptop to stay connected. According to the note from Walter, I tried to be sensible, to choose only what I truly needed. But after days of having nothing, the ability to select new possessions was overwhelming. By the time we returned to the hotel, the limousine was filled with bags and boxes. This is too much, I told Walter over dinner that evening. I can't accept all this. Why not? He asked simply. Because it's charity, I said, the word sticking in my throat. Walter leaned forward, his expression serious. Is that what you thought when you took me in? That you were giving me charity? Of course not. We were friends. We wanted to help. Exactly. This isn't charity, Ellie. This is friendship. This is one friend helping another in their time of need. He paused, studying my face. Would it make you feel better to know that I've spent more on business dinners than I have on everything I've done for you so far? I had to laugh at that. Oddly, yes. Good. Then stop worrying about it. Besides, he added with a twinkle in his eye, I'm having fun spending money on someone who actually appreciates it, instead of shareholders who just want more. The next week passed in a blur. Walter was often busy with work during the day, but we had dinner together every evening. Sometimes in my suite, sometimes in the hotel's exclusive restaurant, once at his penthouse apartment across town. He never pushed for details about Mitchell's rejection, but I found myself wanting to tell him. Over a glass of wine in his elegantly appointed living room, I finally shared the whole painful story. Walter listened without interrupting, his expression darkening as I recounted Mitchell's cold dismissal and Tiffany's thinly veiled contempt. "I'm sorry," I concluded. "I shouldn't speak ill of my son." "You're not," Walter said firmly. "You're stating facts. And the fact is he behaved abhorrently." He was quiet for a moment, swirling the wine in his glass. "You know, I never had children. Sometimes I regretted that. But then I see situations like this and think maybe I was spared the disappointment of raising someone who could turn their back on family." "Mitchell wasn't always like this," I said defensively. "He was a sweet boy. Somewhere along the way he just changed." "Money and status change people," Walter observed. "Not always for the better." The next day, Walter asked to meet me for lunch in the hotel restaurant. He seemed unusually nervous, fidgeting with his napkin and avoiding my eyes. "I have a proposition for you," he said finally. "You need a place to live, and I happen to own several properties that are sitting empty." "Walter." He held up a hand. "Hear me out before you refuse. I have a townhouse in Riverside Gardens that I bought as an investment. 3 bedrooms, fully furnished, in a nice neighborhood with good security. It's just sitting there, unoccupied. You'd be doing me a favor by living in it, actually. Empty houses deteriorate faster." "I can't afford the rent on a place like that," I protested. "Who said anything about rent? I'm offering it to you, Ellie. Consider it partial repayment for what you and Harold did for me." I stared at him, speechless. "A house?" He was offering me a house. "It's too much," I whispered. Walter reached across the table and took my hands in his. "Eleanor Thompson, you and Harold saved my life and gave me a chance to become who I am today. If I gave you 10 houses, it wouldn't be too much." His eyes were serious, his grip warm and strong. "Please, let me do this for you. If not for yourself, then for Harold. He would want you taken care of." I thought about what Harold would say if he were here. He'd tell me to accept with grace, to allow myself to be helped. He'd remind me that pride makes a poor companion in old age. "Okay," I said finally, "but only if you let me do something in return. I don't know what yet, but something." Walter's face broke into a delighted smile. "Deal." The townhouse was everything Walter had described and more. Located in a peaceful gated community, it was elegant without being ostentatious. The furniture was comfortable and tasteful, the kitchen modern, the master bedroom spacious and bright. It even had a small garden in the back where I could plant flowers. As Vincent helped me bring in my new possessions, I felt a curious mixture of gratitude and disbelief. Just 2 weeks ago I'd lost everything. Now, through the kindness of an old friend, I had more than I'd ever dreamed possible. That evening, sitting on the patio with a cup of tea, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of pink and gold, I allowed myself to fully accept this incredible turn of events. Walter's generosity had given me more than material comfort. It had restored my faith in human kindness. It had reminded me that for every person who turns away, there is someone else who opens their arms. My new life was beginning, and for the first time since the fire, I felt ready to embrace it. 3 weeks after moving into the townhouse, I was beginning to feel settled. The attorney Diane Prentice had filed suit against my former landlord and was confident we would win a substantial settlement. I'd returned to my part-time job at the library, finding comfort in the familiar routine of shelving books and reading to children. Walter called or visited almost daily, often bringing small gifts, a plant for the garden or a book he thought I'd enjoy. I hadn't heard from Mitchell since the day he dropped me at the motel. I'd called once, leaving a message with my new phone number, but he hadn't returned the call. Robert, on the other hand, called every few days, delighted by my change in circumstances. "Walter Hammond, the Walter Hammond is your friend? And he gave you a house? Mom, that's amazing." I was having lunch with Walter at a small cafe near the library when my phone buzzed with a text message. I glanced at it, then stared in surprise. "Everything okay?" Walter asked, noticing my expression. "It's from Mitchell," I said, reading the message again. "He wants to know if I'm free for dinner tonight. He says he's been trying to reach me." Walter's eyebrows rose. "Has he?" "No," I said, scrolling through my call history. Not a single call or text before this. Interesting timing, Walter mused. Any idea what prompted this sudden concern? I shook my head, but a suspicion was forming. You haven't done anything, have you? Contacted him somehow? Walter looked offended. Of course not. I would never interfere without your permission. He paused, then added with a slight smile, though I may have posted a photo of us at the charity gala last weekend on my social media. With your name tagged. The charity gala, a lavish affair benefiting Walter's foundation, covered extensively by local media. Walter had insisted I accompany him, buying me a beautiful evening gown for the occasion and introducing me to everyone as my dear friend Eleanor, who gave me my start in life. You think Mitchell saw the photo and realized, I began, that his mother is friends with one of the wealthiest men in the country? It seems plausible. Walter shrugged. People like Mitchell tend to pay attention to such things. I stared at the text message, unsure how to respond. Part of me wanted to ignore it, to give Mitchell a taste of the silence I'd experienced from him. But another part, the mother part, wanted to see my son, to understand why he'd turned his back on me, to seek some kind of resolution. What should I do? I asked Walter. What do you want to do? I considered the question carefully. I think I need to see him. For closure, if nothing else. Walter nodded. Then see him. But remember, you're not the same vulnerable woman who showed up at his door with nowhere to go. You're stronger now. Don't let him make you feel small again. I texted Mitchell back, agreeing to dinner at 7. He responded immediately, suggesting we meet at his house. Tiffany is looking forward to seeing you, he added, a claim so improbable it would have been laughable if it weren't so sad. As the day wore on, my anxiety about the upcoming dinner grew. What did Mitchell want? An explanation of my relationship with Walter? Access to my newfound connection? Or was it possible he genuinely regretted his actions and wanted to make amends? When I returned to the townhouse to change for dinner, I found a bouquet of yellow roses on my doorstep with a card from Walter. Remember your worth, it read simply. The flowers and his words gave me courage. Instead of taking a taxi to Mitchell's house, I asked Vincent if he could drive me. Walter had insisted I use his car service whenever I needed it, and tonight I wanted the armor of arriving in style. Vincent agreed readily, and at 6:45, the limousine pulled up to Mitchell's house in Lakeside Estates. The look on the security guard's face when I gave my name was priceless. Clearly, the woman who had left in shame 3 weeks ago was not the same one returning in a chauffeured limousine, wearing designer clothes and carrying a handbag that cost more than a month's rent at the Pinewood Motel. Mitchell opened the door before I could ring the bell, his expression a mixture of surprise and calculation as he took in my appearance and the limousine waiting at the curb. Mom, he said, leaning in for a hug that I returned stiffly. You look different. Thank you for inviting me, I replied, stepping past him into the house. Tiffany appeared from the kitchen, her smile as artificial as the flowers in her foyer arrangement. Eleanor, what a lovely surprise. We've been so worried about you. Have you? I asked mildly. I left a message with my new number 3 weeks ago. A flicker of discomfort crossed Mitchell's face. We've been incredibly busy. The charity gala, and Mason's soccer tournament, and Tiffany's committee work. Of course, I said. I understand how full your schedule must be. The children came bounding down the stairs, their genuine delight at seeing me a stark contrast to their parents' forced warmth. Grandma! Sophia cried, throwing her arms around me. We saw your picture with the rich man. Was that really you? Sophia, Tiffany admonished. That's not polite. It's fine, I assured her. Yes, Sophia, that was really me. Mr. Hammond is an old friend of mine and your grandfather's from college. Is he your boyfriend now? Mason asked innocently. Mitchell cleared his throat loudly. Kids, why don't you go wash up for dinner? Mom and I need to catch up. After the children had gone upstairs, an awkward silence fell. Mitchell gestured toward the living room. Shall we sit? Can I get you a drink? Water is fine, I said, taking a seat on the edge of the sofa. I would not get comfortable here. This was not a social visit. It was a reckoning. Mitchell busied himself pouring drinks, his movements jerky with nervous energy. Tiffany perched on an armchair, her posture rigid, her smile fixed. "So," Mitchell said, handing me a glass of water. "You seem to be doing well." "Very well, in fact." "I am," I agreed. "After I left here, I stayed at a motel for a night. Then I reconnected with Walter Hammond, an old friend who's been extremely generous." "Walter Hammond," Mitchell repeated, as if testing the name on his tongue. "The tech billionaire. I had no idea you knew him." "There's a lot you don't know about me, Mitchell," I said quietly. "You never asked." Another uncomfortable silence descended. "Mom," Mitchell finally said, leaning forward, "I want to apologize for what happened. We weren't at our best that day. The stress of the situation, the sudden nature of it all." "What your son is trying to say," Tiffany interrupted, "is that we reacted poorly to an unexpected crisis. If we had known you had other options." "If you had known I had a wealthy friend, you mean?" I asked, my voice steady. "Would that have made a difference in whether you had space for me?" "That's not fair," Mitchell protested, though his eyes slid away from mine. "It wasn't about that. It was about timing, and the guest room renovation and—" "Mitchell," I said, setting down my water glass, "let's be honest with each other at least this once. You turned me away when I had nowhere else to go. When I had lost everything. When I needed my family most. We gave you money for a motel," Tiffany pointed out, as if that somehow absolved them. $300, I acknowledged. "That was your price for not having to deal with me. $300 to ease your conscience." "That's not—" Mitchell began, but I held up a hand. "Please let me finish. I've thought a lot about what happened, trying to understand it. And I've realized something important. You and I have very different definitions of family. To me, family means showing up for each other, especially in the hard times. It means making room at your table and in your life, even when it's inconvenient." "We do support family," Mitchell insisted. "But we have our own family to think about too. The kids, our commitments." "I understand that," I said. "What I don't understand is how you could look me in the eye and tell me you had no room for your own mother when I had just lost everything." The words hung in the air between us. Mitchell shifted uncomfortably, avoiding my gaze. "I'm not here to make you feel guilty," I continued. "I'm here because I needed to say these things, for my own peace of mind. And because, despite everything, you're still my son, and I love you." "We love you too, Mom," Mitchell said quickly, relief evident in his voice. "And now that we know you're friends with Walter Hammond, maybe we can all spend more time together. In fact, we were thinking of having a dinner party next weekend. Perhaps you could bring Walter? I'd love to meet him properly." And there it was. The real reason for the invitation. Not concern for me, not remorse for their actions, but access to Walter and his influence. My heart sank with the confirmation of what I'd already suspected. "I don't think that would be appropriate," I said gently. "Walter and I value our privacy." "But surely he'd want to meet your family," Tiffany pressed. "I could introduce him to some wonderful people in our circle. The mayor will be at our next fundraiser, and several prominent business leaders." I stood up, suddenly tired of the pretense. "I appreciate the invitation to dinner, but I think I should go now." "But you just got here," Mitchell protested. "We haven't even eaten yet. Tiffany made your favorite pot roast." "My favorite is lasagna," I corrected him. "Harold's recipe." Mitchell flushed. "Right, of course. I meant one of your favorites." I moved toward the door, Mitchell and Tiffany following in confusion. "Mom, wait. Don't leave like this. We want to make things right." I turned to face them. "Do you know what would have made things right, Mitchell? If you had called to check on me after leaving me at that motel. If you had shown any concern at all before discovering I had a connection to someone you find valuable." "That's not fair," Mitchell repeated, but the protest sounded hollow even to his own ears. "Perhaps not," I agreed. "But it's honest. And that's what I need in my life now. Honesty. And people who value me for who I am, not who I know." "So that's it?" Mitchell asked, a note of panic in his voice. "You're just writing us off?" "No," I said softly. "I'm setting boundaries. I'll always be your mother, and I'll always love you. But I won't allow myself to be used or taken for granted anymore. When you're ready for a real relationship based on mutual respect, I'll be here. Sophia and Mason appeared at the top of the stairs, their faces confused and sad. Grandma, aren't you staying for dinner? Sophia called. I smiled up at them. Not tonight, sweetheart. But I'd love for you both to visit me at my new house sometime. If your parents agree, of course. I walked out the door without waiting for a response, my heart both heavy and strangely light. Vincent was waiting by the limousine, opening the door as I approached. Everything all right, Mrs. Thompson? He asked, noting my early return. Yes, Vincent, I said, settling into the back seat. For the first time in a very long time, I think it is. That night, Walter came over with takeout Chinese food. We sat in my garden as the sun set, and I recounted the evening's events. I'm proud of you, Walter said when I finished. Standing up for yourself isn't easy, especially with family. It was one of the hardest things I've ever done, I admitted. But also one of the most necessary. Walter raised his glass in a toast. To boundaries. And to new beginnings. As we clinked glasses, I felt a sense of peace wash over me. The confrontation with Mitchell had been painful, but it had also been freeing. I had spoken my truth, set my boundaries, and walked away with my dignity intact. It wasn't the happy family reconciliation I might have wished for, but it was honest. And after a lifetime of putting everyone else's needs before my own, honesty felt like a gift I was finally giving myself. The morning after my confrontation with Mitchell, I woke with a curious lightness. The weight of unspoken words of hurt and betrayal had lifted. In its place was a tentative hope, a sense that I was finally writing my own story rather than playing a supporting role in someone else's. My new townhouse was beginning to feel like home. I'd arranged the furniture to my liking, planted cheerful marigolds and petunias in the garden boxes, and hung a few carefully chosen pieces of art on the walls. It wasn't filled with decades of memories like my old house had been, but it was becoming a place of new beginnings. Walter had been true to his word about helping me rebuild my life, but he'd been careful to respect my independence. The townhouse was in my name, a fact I discovered when I found the deed in a folder of important documents he'd prepared for me. He'd established a modest trust fund that provided a monthly income to supplement my Social Security and library salary. Enough that I didn't have to worry about bills, but not so much that I felt dependent on his charity. 2 months after the fire, Diane Prentice called with news. My landlord had agreed to settle the negligence lawsuit rather than go to court. The amount was substantial, far more than I had expected. It's a fair settlement, Diane assured me. The evidence of negligence was overwhelming. The fire inspector's report alone was damning. When the check arrived, I stared at it in disbelief. More money than I'd ever had at one time. Enough to secure my future, to never worry about being vulnerable again. My first thought was to repay Walter for everything he'd done, but he flatly refused. That money is for your security, not for assuaging my ego, he said firmly. If you want to do something meaningful with it, find a way to help others who've been through similar experiences. His words sparked an idea. With Walter's guidance, I established a small foundation called Second Chances, dedicated to helping seniors who had lost their homes to fire or natural disasters. We provided emergency housing assistance, help navigating insurance claims, and support rebuilding lives. The work gave me purpose and connection, turning my personal tragedy into something positive for others. I began volunteering at a shelter for fire victims, offering both practical assistance and emotional support. Who better to understand the unique grief of losing not just a home, but the physical touchstones of a life? I couldn't restore what they'd lost, but I could show them by example that survival was possible, that life continued, sometimes in unexpected and even beautiful ways. At the library, I started a book club specifically for seniors, creating a community where we discussed literature, but also shared life experiences and supported each other through challenges. It became a highlight of my week, these gatherings of vibrant minds and open hearts. Slowly, I rebuilt my collection of personal treasures. Not the same items, of course, but new ones that held their own significance. A handcrafted bowl from a local potter. A quilted wall hanging made by one of my book club members. A set of wind chimes for my garden that played Harold's favorite melody. 3 months after our confrontation, Mitchell called. The conversation was stilted, cautious on both sides, But it was a start. He asked if he could bring the children to visit my new home. I agreed readily, missing my grandchildren deeply. When they came, Tiffany stayed in the car, a small mercy. Mitchell was subdued, clearly uncomfortable in this tangible evidence of my changed circumstances. But the children were delighted, exploring the townhouse with enthusiasm and exclaiming over the garden. "You seem really happy, Mom," Mitchell observed as we watched the children examining the fish pond in the community courtyard. "I am," I said simply. "It's been a journey, but I'm in a good place now." He nodded, his eyes not quite meeting mine. "I've been thinking a lot about what you said. About family and showing up for each other. And I think I've been getting it wrong. For a long time." He hesitated, then added, "I'd like to do better. If you'll let me." It wasn't a full apology, but it was a beginning. A crack in the wall of pride and materialism he'd built around himself. I reached out and squeezed his hand briefly. "One day at a time," I said. "That's all any of us can do." Robert called with exciting news. His band had been signed to a small record label, and they were planning a tour that would bring him to our city. "I can't wait to see your new place, Mom," he enthused. "And to meet this Walter guy who's been taking such good care of you." When Robert arrived, with his shaggy hair and worn jeans, he brought a vibrancy that filled the townhouse with laughter. He and Walter hit it off immediately, bonding over a shared love of vintage vinyl records and science fiction. Watching them together, I felt a sense of family that had nothing to do with obligation and everything to do with genuine connection. "He's great, Mom," Robert said after Walter had left following a dinner that stretched late into the evening. "I get why you and Dad were such good friends with him." "He saved me," I admitted. "Not just with the material things, but by reminding me that I still mattered." Robert's eyes grew serious. "You always mattered. Mitchell was an idiot not to see that." "He's trying now," I said. "In his own way. Too little too late if you ask me." "Maybe," I acknowledged. "But I'm his mother. I have to leave the door open at least a crack." Over the next few months, a tentative new relationship formed with Mitchell and his family. He began calling regularly, sometimes just to check in. The children visited often, and occasionally Tiffany would come too, her attitude noticeably less frosty. They never asked about Walter again, a small but significant sign of respect for my boundaries. As the first anniversary of the fire approached, Walter suggested a small gathering at my townhouse. "Not to commemorate the loss," he explained, "but to celebrate how far you've come." The party was intimate, just a few close friends. Patricia, my former neighbor who had been my first haven after the fire. Diane Prentice, who had become a friend as well as my attorney. Several members of my book club. Robert, who had flown in for the occasion. And to my surprise, Mitchell and his family. There was an initial awkwardness when Mitchell and Walter came face to face, but Walter, with his innate kindness, soon put everyone at ease. He had a gift for finding common ground, for making people feel valued. By the end of the evening, even Tiffany was laughing at his stories. After everyone had gone, Walter stayed to help me clean up. We worked in comfortable silence for a while, then sat in the garden with cups of tea. "Happy?" he asked simply. I considered the question, looking back over the tumultuous year. The devastating loss. The painful rejection. The unexpected reunion. The gradual rebuilding of a life. "Yes," I said, realizing with some surprise that it was entirely true. Not despite everything that happened, but in some ways because of it. Walter nodded, understanding. Sometimes we need to lose the structure we've built to see what foundation remains. "And who remains?" I added. The fire showed me who would stand with me when everything was gone. It was painful but clarifying. "Like a forest after a wildfire," Walter mused. "What grows back is often stronger, more resilient." We sat in silence for a moment, watching the stars emerge in the darkening sky. "I never thanked you properly," I said finally. "Not just for the material help, but for reminding me of my own worth when I'd forgotten it." Walter smiled, his eyes crinkling at the corners in that familiar way. "You did the same for me once. Besides, true friendship isn't about keeping score. It's about being there when it matters most." As Walter left that night, I stood in the doorway of my new home, reflecting on the journey of the past year. I had lost everything and found something precious in the ashes. My own strength. The fire had destroyed my possessions but illuminated what truly mattered. The rejection by my son had been painful but had freed me to set healthy boundaries. And an old friendship, rekindled in my darkest hour, had shown me that it's never too late for new beginnings. Life doesn't always give us what we want or what we think we deserve. Sometimes it takes away the very things we believe we cannot live without. But in that taking, it creates space for unexpected gifts. For growth. For transformation. For the discovery that we are more than what we own or even who loves us. We are our own foundation, our own home. As I closed the door and moved through my quiet house, touching the new treasures that had replaced the old, I felt a profound gratitude. Not just for the material security that Walter's generosity had provided, but for the inner peace I had found. The knowledge that I could survive loss. That I could stand alone if necessary. That I could rebuild not just a home but a life. Have you ever experienced a moment that changed everything? That forced you to reimagine your life from the ground up? I'd love to hear your stories in the comments below. And if this story touched you in some way, please consider subscribing to my channel and sharing with others who might need to be reminded of their own resilience. Remember, sometimes the most beautiful new beginnings rise from the ashes of what we thought we couldn't live without. Thank you for listening, and may you find strength in whatever challenges you face.